Hi, welcome to Wetpixel Live. My name is Adam Hanlon. I'm the editor of Wetpixel, and we'd like to thank Nauticam for sponsoring today's episode. Nauticam do a huge range of housings, arms, ports, and some wonderful underwater optics. And please head on over to nauticam.com to check out the full range. I'm very happy to be joined once again by my friend and fellow presenter, Alex Mustard. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Adam. Nice to see you. Good to be back on Wetpixel Live.
It is, yeah. It felt like a long time. It's sort of a bit of a return to normal, bit of kind of adjusting to what we're doing, isn't it? But yeah, it's great.
And some software issues, to be fair.
Yeah. Anyway, right.
We've downgraded our software so it works again.
Yeah. Well, it's still working. So let's keep going while the going's good. Obviously, one of the things that's happened in the interim between our last Wetpixel Live and now is we've had some important competition results. And the first one we thought we'd like to talk about was the Wetpixel Dive Photo Guide Masters competition. The results were announced some time ago, but you and I haven't really touched base on them. And obviously, first of all, just to say thanks very much to everyone who entered. Congratulations to all the participants and obviously all those amongst the awards. And massive thanks to our panel of judges, which was Imran Ahmed, Mike Bartik, Florian Fisher, Stephen Frink, and Jennifer Hayes. Did a wonderful job of judging.
I think they did pick very good images. Actually, I thought it felt a well-judged competition. So
it was a pleasure working with them, and you know we really appreciate them. They give up their time and expertise for actually precious little reward. So thank you very much. Anyway, Alex. So I guess we need to start with the winning shot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is Martin Brun, a good friend of mine, and it's obviously in a cave in Mexico. It's called Speleothems, and it was the best of show and also the winner of the black and white category.
Yeah, and you can see why. I would say I think Martin's been doing some fantastic work inside the caves and caverns, diving to really spectacular areas and photographing them particularly well. And I think he's got a whole portfolio of stunning imagery. His main limitation, I think, at the moment in terms of competition wins is that, you know, he's doing so well that there's kind of, you know, that element of, well, you know, we've already seen these amazing photos. So I think that's the only thing holding back. But what I like is that he is trying different things with them. And actually a lot of the these sort of cave images, actually the colors, the blues and the whites are particularly spectacular, and to choose to go monochrome with it is is actually quite a strong creative decision. And it really focuses you in on the texture, the shadows and the atmosphere, and I think it works really, really well. It's a very well crafted image. The whole frame has got interest right to the corners, yet it still has a strong focal point in the diver, who is very well positioned and very well balanced with all the speleotherms, all the stalagmites and stalactites around them. So I just think it's just a classy piece of work. I don't really have any criticism of it. I know we try and cast a critical eye, but it's not a picture that you can really criticize.
I love the fact. I think I love the monotone approach. In that. It really, the whole thing about putting it in black and white is this idea of generating texture. It just shows that texture just so beautifully.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm only seeing it relatively small on the screen here, but I imagine it is absolutely stunning as a huge print. The sort of picture that you can explore for hours and really enjoy.
Yeah, I think one of the things about Martin, and I know Martin quite well, is he's a great experimenter. He experiments with tools. He's got some very interesting and different lens options, for example, that he uses. And I don't actually know what he used for this, but and tools, but also creative techniques. He's one of these people that really goes out with an idea in mind, tries it out, and I think like all of us, he has a reasonable portion of the ideas that don't work, but every now and again, because he's trying different stuff, he hits on something that really works. I think this is probably a good example of one of those.
Really. I think also with these shots, we often forget the challenge of just getting to that sort of scene.
Yeah.
We almost take that, because we see a lot of them, we almost take for granted. Oh yeah, just another dive,
Yeah.
But actually, it really is an extraordinary environment, and both him and the model in the picture have, had to have, a high amount of training and a high amount of skill to get into that position, even, to get to the photo. So it deserves a lot of credit. I think we should also highlight, this was the winner overall, but also won the black and white category. But
Yeah.
I'd like to highlight another picture from the black and white category because I thought it was a particularly strong category actually.
Yeah. Agree.
And I think it's also, I think black and white is often underappreciated by underwater photographers, and I think it's great that the Masters has a dedicated black and white category to celebrate this type of images. And also because second place in this category was taken by a friend of mine, Wayne Lai from China, who obviously with the restrictions they've had over the last few years has not been able to get away. So nice to see him enjoying some success in competitions with this photo here, which was taken on my Red Sea workshop. In fact, it was taken at the same time as a photo of mine that's very well known. So they're quite similar shots because it's the same school of fish on the same dive at the same time. I think yes, and they're also processed in very similar ways. So I like the photo because I have a very similar photo where I made very similar decisions in terms of the processing. So I think, but I really like this picture. I think it's very strong.
Well, I quite agree. I mean, I think it's a lovely picture. I love the symmetry of the circle. I love the fact that it has this semblance of an eye. At least in my mind, it does. And I think even the fish in the middle actually add to that a bit. And I love the idea of the water being black in the background. Well, I guess I can ask you, Alex, because you have a similar idea. How is this lit? How has he gone about lighting the fish and separating them from the background?
So this school of fish was quite deep.
Right.
And I'm very disciplined in this sort of situation in that I'll be very aware of my depth when I'm, following a school of fish that's below me. Wayne, less disciplined. And he carried on following them for a long time, not for the first time on one of these trips, got a bit carried away. I think I was fortunate that I was in a slightly better position at the beginning when this school of fish kind of loomed up from the blue, and then when it sort of rolled back down. So it's photographed looking down into the abyss. Okay. And therefore our strobes and the sunlight are picking out the fish against the dark water, and actually in color. And I actually have my picture processed in color as well on my website, so you can see them both if you search for Big Eye Jacks. You can see that actually it's a very dark blue with the fish lit with the sun, lit with some strobe, and they stand out very well. And actually, it's one of those pictures that as soon as you press V in Lightroom to turn it to black and white, it looks almost like this straight away. It just, this is kind of and then you just tweak the conversion a little bit more, but that dark blue water helps the colors, helps the fish really stand out.
It's funny because I don't know whether that's my preconceptions, but I've always imagined that you're shooting up, which is why I was querying how you get the dark water. But of course, when you say you're shooting down, that makes perfect sense. Yeah,
and I think it's obviously very nice to photograph fish schools from below looking up.
Yeah.
But actually, the down angle works well on them, and one of the problems of going underneath them is, of course, your bubbles.
Yeah.
And that can become a major impact on the shot. And so an advantage of shooting down is you often disturb the fish less because you're not breathing through them, and you tend to get these very nice formations. And I have similar shots taken of schooling barracuda as well, which was in the wildlife photographer. My photo like this was in the wildlife photographer, but my barracuda was also in the wildlife photographer, but in their People's Choice category. I remember, quite a few years ago. But they're actually very similar shots. So I'm glad they didn't rule against me because of my previous photo, which is quite similar, even though of a different species. Right.
So I thought, should we move on to wide angle unrestricted, Alex?
Yes.
And Tom Schlesinger's lovely image. I know that it's part of a series of images of a Goliath grouper surrounded by baitfish. Probably shot in Florida. I'd assume Tom's based in Florida, so it's likely to be Florida.
I mean, this is classically strong subject matter, and I like how the fish is emerging from the bait fish, and particularly that it seems to be turning at this point. So its body almost seems to have vanished, because I think it's sort of come towards and then turned sideways, and so it looks like that it's almost just a floating head amongst the fish, and I really like that aspect of the picture. For me, I would think this picture could be stronger if it was a little bit more stroby and a little bit more available light, a bit less available light. In that, I think you would just get more of a kick from everything. and still have the same effect. The pose is absolutely perfect. The composition is perfect. I just, I'd love to see all those baitfish sparkling like, like lights. And I think to see a little bit more of the grouper. I can see everything, but I have to look. And I think maybe a little bit more strobe, a little bit less ambient light, particularly coming through in the background, would perhaps have made an even more impactful shot. But I don't know, maybe I'm just being harsh. I mean, I was trying to be a bit critical because we've been so positive, and I know people like us to cast a more critical eye on these pictures. But yeah, I'm surprised with baitfish to have gone with such a ambient light, kind of almost overwhelming the picture type of exposure. For me, wouldn't be the way I would go with this subject matter.
I think it would be interesting to put it through Lightroom and just to dial down the blues, pull the luminosity channel down in the blues and see what happens. But as you say, you then wouldn't get the sparkle on the fish. So
yeah, I'd like to see, get a better connection like that. The eye of the grouper is quite lost. I'd like to see a better amount of light onto the face of the grouper and a bit more of a kick of light across this lovely sparkly school of fish, and then a darker blue background. I do like how the light comes through the baitfish, to be honest. But certainly I'd like a little bit more, kick from the main subjects, I think.
And we're going to stick with winners for the moment. The next image that's coming up on my feed that I'm looking at here is the winner of the macro unrestricted category, which is Sander van der Heyden. I hope I Helden, and I'm sorry, I'm not normally too bad with Dutch names, but Ellen the J has caught me. And it's this lovely picture of a jawfish, I think.
Yes, yellow-headed jawfish, I guess from Bonaire, just from the nationality of the photographer. And nice shot of a jawfish with eggs. I think these are a great subject, and there's no doubt that the Caribbean jawfish, and particularly the yellowheads, offer a really special photo opportunity like this. And for those divers who maybe have not been able to travel as widely, but have been able to visit some of the Caribbean destinations in the last year, these are a prime subject to work for. What I like is you really get the yellow of the adult comes through, and all the eyes of the youngsters come through. I like that the mouth is open. This, for me, isn't quite peak of the action. When they aerate the eggs, the jawfish, they spit the whole clutch of eggs that you can see inside the throat here. They actually spit them completely out. Now, at that point, you probably wouldn't see much of the face. So I think this is absolutely fine for me, because you can see the babies, you can see the eyes of the adult, and you can see the whole fish of the adult and all those eggs down in the throat. But I particularly like shooting these when at that very rare moment, which they do about, if they're relaxed, about once every 10 minutes, where they actually spit the whole ball of eggs out, and it's called churning, and they actually go juk, 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 and that they kind of turn the ball of eggs around and they swallow it back down again. And I think that's such a remarkable picture, to have this ball of eggs sitting on the mouth of a fish, that I think that for me, whenever I don't see that in a jawfish picture, I'm like, yeah, I can get this shot, but the shot I want is the one with the eggs out.
I think he's done a beautiful job of controlling the background, though. I think it's a perfect balance between depth of field, which sharp where it needs to be, but you've got that lovely creamy kind of out of focus background, which I think is beautifully shot. And I like the eye contact from the actual fish. I think there's plenty of eye contact.
I agree, and I think the symmetrical framing is very strong. No, I mean, I see exactly why it's done so well.
Scrolling down at my end,
you're the second place in that category, which we could maybe just highlight briefly, which is called Blue Danger. I'm not convinced that's an underwater photo. I think that's taken from above the water.
Possibly, yeah.
Just the subjects are in the water, but I think that's a looking down on the parietii, whatever it's called, and the pelagic jellyfish, pelagic nudibranch. Right. Let's scroll on to macro traditional, because wide angle traditional.
Yeah. So the winner was Enrico Smoghi with the circular fisheye shot. I think it's a circular fisheye shot, or is it a tube shot?
So this I really like. I think it's always good to have these strong in-camera tricks in in this traditional category, because you're very strict on the raw file checking in this category,
Indeed.
unlike
Yeah.
a lot of competitions, and
Yeah.
so people really have to do these things in camera.
Yeah.
I actually don't know how he has done this photo, which is really nice, because to be honest, it's very, very rare that I see a photo in an underwater competition where I don't just look at it and go. And in fact, I was talking to a friend last night, and they were talking about one of their recent competition winners, and I had to correct them and said, I know it's your photo, but I can tell you didn't do it that way. Confused with how you did it. And then they were like, oh yeah, no, yeah, you're right, I remember now. I got confused because I was doing lots of different things on the dive, and now you've reminded me, yes, you're right. So normally I know, and sometimes even better than the photographers. But this one, it's because you can't usually use a reflection tube with a fisheye, unless I guess, of course, you made a really big reflection tube.
Yeah.
So that would be my only, explanation. And maybe because Enrico typically shoots with compact cameras, maybe using one of the mini fisheyes, like the little in-on fisheye, you
Yeah.
can still fish a reflection tube around it. However, I'm not 100% convinced. No, I think that is that reef. Yeah, no, I think that is a reflection tube of this shot. So I think it's a straight shot with a mini fisheye and then a reflection tube around the dome port, which I think is, a very creative idea and very competition ready. I think if this was a standard shot without the reflection tube, it's not, it's nothing special.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I do look forward to seeing some more photos from this photographer using this technique and actually basing it around a slightly better photograph.
It's worth briefly talking about what the traditional categories mean. I think I sort of meant to do that to introduce it, in that most photography competitions, underwater photography competitions, there's varying degrees of post capture processing allowed. In the Wetpixel Dive Photo Guide Masters, the decision was for traditional categories. There's basically almost no post-processing allowed, and any post-processing has to be global post-processing. So there's no backscatter removal, for example. You can adjust white balance, you can adjust global tone, but apart from that, there's no selective edits at all. So it's quite restrictive. So I mean, it's one of those things that, as Alex mentioned earlier, you really want to be trying to get these things almost 100% in camera. And that was a creative decision taken by the original founders of the competition. I have to admit, and personally,
Well, we did that. So we did that really because we had a divided community.
Yeah.
And some were very much, particularly in those early days of digital, some were like, no, it must be absolutely pure. And others were like, no, the whole point of digital is that it shouldn't be. Yeah. And ultimately, after much toing and froing, we actually decided to go, well, you can have one of each. And the problem we would often have is that for years, we would have people entering shots that would win in the unrestricted, but they wouldn't pass the requirement in traditional, and they'd enter them in traditional. And we'd be like, stop trying to cheat. Just put them in the other category. Your picture's good enough to win. But they always wanted to be like in that traditional, but then they would break the rules.
And I think times have changed, actually. I think now there's much more acceptance of post processing. So whether this type of category has a long term future, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But it's certainly interesting to see the difference in the quality, in the difference of the types of entry, not the quality so much that we get between the so-called traditional categories and the unrestricted categories.
Well, I definitely remember one year in the early days of the Wetpixel competition where I think 9 of the top 10 in the macro traditional all were excluded of the original top 10 after judging because they didn't pass, and all of them would have probably placed in unrestricted, but the photographers thought, oh, I've got more chance in the traditional category.
I think. I mean, it still happens. I mean, I did the raw auditing for these images this year, and certainly there were some that didn't make it through the raw audit, which is a shame. I think, as you say, they're great images. It's a shame that the rules don't allow them to be awarded.
So, should we move on to macro traditional?
Yeah.
So macro traditional, that's the last category we're going to cover, and the winner here is this lovely yellow pygmy goby. Sitting on very mature eggs, which is really nice to see. And I think the snoot lighting, is obviously, it's a good solution for a traditional macro category because it's a very good way of creating a clean image without backscatter. And also, I think it really suits this subject matter because it just distills the image down to those constituent elements, and you're not distracted by often the quite unattractive places that fish like this live, which I think is really, really good. I think that the photographer could have gone a little bit tighter on this, and they could have perhaps aimed the snoot just a little bit further back in the frame. And actually, if they'd, in this situation, if assuming they're holding the snoot, and probably they're not, it's probably a dive guide, but if they were holding the snoot, if in this situation you move slightly closer and refocused, that snoot, which would be attached to your camera, would move back in the frame, a couple of millimeters, as well. And then you would have the light fall off right at the front of those fish, of the eggs. And I think that would be really, and then you'd have a little bit more of the body of the goby lit as well. And I think that would, you'd get those pectoral fins slightly better lit. And I think that would have really good. But it's a very, very nice pose. Very well taken.
And frequently these gobies don't sit still for that long, so the frustration in trying to get them in the pose, in the position, and snoot like them at the same time, it's a pretty high failure rate shot.
Yeah, and really nice to see it with the babies as well. They're mature as well. It's not just young eggs, nice big eggs. So it's well spotted subject. So yeah, very good.
Yeah, no.
Anyway, thanks for showing those to me, Adam.
Yeah, no, thank you, Alex, and thank you for your input on them. You mentioned that you've got some pictures showing that same fish school. Where can people get to see those, Alex?
Oh, on my website, if you go to amustard.com, there's an image search facility at the top, and if you just type, I would just type the word big eye in, and that'll obviously bring up big eyes as well as big eye jacks, but you'll be able to tell which ones are which. And I know that there's photos of mine which I prefer them as black and whites, but I've also processed them as color pictures because actually for a lot of magazine use, they don't really want to use the black and white to advertise the diving. They'd rather have a color picture. So I prefer them as black and whites, but you can actually see the original files in blue as well.
I think that would be an interesting exercise for those people that are keen to look. So that's wonderful. Thank you very much. And thanks again to our sponsor, Nauticam, for sponsoring this episode. We can't do these episodes without them. Please feel free to add any comments about any things we've discussed in the episode, and drop us a like if you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you again soon.